Good morning. I was a painfully shy kid growing up. I was an only child and so spent a lot of time around adults, which put me in a tough in-between kind of space socially. I was good at relating to adults, but I was still a kid. And I could hang out with kids, but I didn't have all those kid cultural reference points. And generally, I just didn't quite know where I fit. And then I got to school and something magical happened. There, I got to learn about new things, which I have always deeply loved. But in addition to that, I got instructions. And if I followed the instructions, I would get a grade, a way for me to know exactly how I was doing. I found that I could be really good at school. And when I was good at school, so many things that I was deeply worried about found relief. I knew I was likable and special because teachers took extra time to challenge me and praised my work. I found a place with my peers because they saw me as a smart kid, and if I was a little bit awkward, it was because I was nerdy and not wrong in some fundamental way. Now, I see that this was the beginning of what for me became a runaway train. Little by little, it wasn't enough to be good. I needed to be better and better. I began comparing myself to other people in my classes. I pushed myself harder, took on more challenges, and began to really struggle if I made mistakes. My parents grew concerned when in my junior year, I sobbed for hours on end because I got a B on an English paper. What happened was my sense of self-worth was completely tied up in an external framework. Who was I? What was my place in the world if I was not performing to the highest standard as defined by someone else? I'd only been dating my husband, Taylor, my future husband, Taylor, for a few months when I came up to his room and saw his bed and desk littered with syllabi and papers for his classes that term. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm figuring out how much work I need to do to get a C in this class." I paused, "But you could get an A," I said. He responded with, "I know, but there are other things I want to do." I can't put into words how jolted I felt, how shocked I was that this way of being was even a possibility. And if I'm honest, I thought we might have to break up. But ultimately, it was part of something about him that left me really intrigued. Taylor did not need an A to prove his worth. He intrinsically already knew he was the smart, kind, hardworking person he is, without the report card to prove it. Free from that tether, he was exploring, engaging with his life very differently than I had been. This alternative was something I desperately needed to learn more about. I'm still learning about this. I still agonized over an A- in grad school. Old habits die hard. But I'm beginning to realize that this runaway train of perfectionism ultimately didn't broadcast my worth so much as limit my ability to really be in genuine connection with myself and my community. When I couldn't let myself make mistakes and be openly flawed, I cut myself off from all the learning and loving that happens when we reach out to others, when we allow people to help us, when we are open in our vulnerability. It's a work in progress, and I appreciate the wisdom of others that are teaching how to heal our relationship with ourselves. And I'm so grateful for my partner, Taylor, who continues to be a bell of awareness, pointing me in the direction of self-love and reminding me to make space for the other things that bring us joy and connection.
Our reading this morning is from the first paragraph of the introduction of Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I'm also brave and worthy of love and belonging. In September of 2017, I was on a flight from Portland to Orlando. To fill time on that long journey, I had chosen to listen to the audiobook of Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. I knew of Brown from watching her breakthrough 2011 TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. I really liked it, and I was certainly not alone. According to a 2022 Wall Street Journal article, it is the 5th most watched TED Talk with over 50 million views. Has anybody else seen that? Yeah. At that time, I was struggling and had been for a long while. That was just 8 months before I chose to end my 34-year marriage. That big change was not on my radar yet. I was still invested in figuring out how to make it work. I still believed that if I just tried harder, tried differently, changed something, I could fix myself and thereby fix it. I tried a lot of things in the process. Several individual counselors, multiple couples counselors, workshops, self-help books. Nothing was working. Reading this book was yet another attempt to make something happen. For those who don't know Brene Brown, her website describes her as a researcher, storyteller, and Texan who has spent the past 2 decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. She's also married and the mother of 2. She's written 6 #1 New York Times bestsellers, is a podcaster, has documentaries on HBO and Netflix, and is CEO of The Daring Way, a professional training and certification program on those same topics. She's kind of a thing. So there I was on a 5.5-hour flight, headphones on, audiobook on my phone. The first words of the preface are, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing we'll ever do. It's a good opening line, but it didn't really grab me. At that time, my story was about all the things I was doing. And in spite of my many challenges, I held myself in pretty high regard. As I was about to learn, a big ego is not the same as loving oneself, and my story is not just a list of accomplishments. In many self-help books, one thing I really enjoy are the authors' stories about their patients or clients and what they do to help them. Throughout this book, Brown does a thing I really appreciate. She uses herself as the example of the problem. She talks about her mistakes, her struggles, her embarrassments and shame storms. Using herself as the model of imperfect humanity shows what it really means to own one's own story. It makes her writing feel more approachable and relatable, and gives the lessons she shares more impact. Brene Brown is a qualitative researcher. She interviews people of all ages from around the country, collects thousands of stories, compiles their answers, looks for patterns, and writes about what she learns. As she studied the research that became this book, for the first time ever, she didn't like what she saw. In the prologue, she writes, "I heard stories about the power of embracing imperfection and vulnerability. I learned about the inextricable connection between joy and gratitude, and how things I take for granted, like rest and play, are as vital to our health and as nutrition and exercise." The research participants trusted themselves, and they talked about authenticity and love and belonging in a way that was completely new to me. She called this way of living wholehearted, because the people were living and loving with their whole hearts. The problem she saw was not with the data. The problem was that she was not living a wholehearted life. She continues, "After studying tough topics like shame for a decade, I truly believed I deserved the confirmation that I was living right. But here's the tough lesson I learned that day. How much we know and understand ourselves is critically important, but there is something even more essential to living a wholehearted life: loving ourselves." And perhaps the most painful lesson of that day hit me so hard it took my breath away. It was clear from the data that we cannot give our children what we don't have. When she realized she could not escape the results of this data, she did the only thing she thought she could do. She shelved the research for over a year and got herself a good therapist. She describes that time as her breakdown spiritual awakening. Breakdown, with a line drawn through it, spiritual awakening. By this point in the book, I was interested. Embracing imperfection and vulnerability, joy and gratitude, authenticity and belonging, loving myself, these were things I did not have or know how to do. As I listened, I started taking notes on my phone. When I heard something relevant or useful, I'd pause the book, open my notes app, and write it down. By the end of the book, I had 12 pages of notes on my phone. I was only on page 2 of the book when she got me. She wrote, "What is love? Can we love someone and betray them? Why does our consistent need to fit in sabotage real belonging? Can we love the people in our lives, like our partners and children, more than we love ourselves? How do we define worthiness, and why do we so often end up hustling for it rather than believing in it?" Hearing the idea of hustling for worthiness was the first time I ever read or heard something and felt, that's me. Hustling for worthiness is not central to this book, but it so grabbed my attention that I learned more about it. I've had this quote from Brene Brown saved on my computer desktop since October 2017. "If we spend a lifetime trying to distance ourselves from the parts of us that don't fit who we think we're supposed to be, we stand outside our story and have to hustle for our worthiness by constantly performing, perfecting, pleasing, and proving. You are living your life on the sidelines when you are trying to make sure everyone approves of you, hiding parts of your story for fear of rejection and judgment. avoiding dealing with deep soul pain or even surface wounds for fear it will leave you alone or cause you more pain, and believing the lies that you are not worthy of love and belonging. So let's see. Distancing myself from the parts of my life that don't fit who I think I'm supposed to be. Check. Constantly performing, perfecting, pleasing, and proving. Yep. Trying to make sure everyone approves of me. Hiding parts of me for fear of rejection or judgment. Avoiding dealing with pain. Believing I am not worthy of love or belonging. Even now, I marvel at how accurately that described me. The concept of hustling for worthiness gave me a new way to see myself, my beliefs, and my behaviors, and the challenges I had relating to other people. There's another idea I came across somewhere else that aligns with hustling for worthiness that helped me see myself even more clearly. It's the idea of the false self. According to Wikipedia, English psychoanalyst David Winnicott used false self to denote a sense of self created as a defensive facade. Reading this book revealed to me that I was largely living as a false self, a defensive facade I adjusted to fit whatever situation I was in. I've been attending a therapy group since about this time. Back then, the leader of that group described me as being like one of those tube men you see outside car lots. Always blowing here or there, waving and wiggling, reading the room and trying to figure out what I needed to do, how I needed to perform or please or prove or perfect so that I could be accepted wherever I was. I was not living authentically or wholeheartedly. Perhaps you can imagine how difficult it was to relate to me at that time. So as my flight to Orlando continued, I kept listening, pausing, writing myself notes. That book, landing in my life at that time, was a pivot point for me. Once I knew hustling for worthiness was my thing, I saw myself doing it everywhere. Did this new understanding immediately set me on a better path from which I never strayed? No. As an imperfect person, it took time and work, attempts and failures, hard lessons learned and learned again, and help from others to get me going in the right direction. And I am going in a better direction. I've been moving in this more wholehearted direction now long enough that when I do find myself hustling for worthiness, I get this shock of recognition. I'm doing it. When that happens, I usually have this moment when things kind of slow down and I see two paths before me. The old path of hustling for worthiness and a new path toward more wholehearted living. And in that moment, I get to make a choice. That cycle, recognition, pause, and choice, is a gift I'm grateful for every time I get to experience it. The Gifts of Imperfection is packed so full of wisdom and insight and advice. So much so that everything I'm going to talk about this morning comes from just the first 30 pages of this pretty short book. Here are a few of the other things that I found really valuable. Let's start with a definition of wholehearted living. Wholehearted living is not a one-time choice. It's a process. In fact, she writes, I believe it's the journey of a lifetime. Before embarking on any journey, including this one, it's important to talk about what we need to bring along. What does it take to live and love from a place of worthiness? How do we embrace imperfection? How do we cultivate what we need and leave behind what we don't? The answers to all of these questions are courage, compassion, and connection. She continues, courage, compassion, and connection seem like big, lofty ideals, but in reality, they are daily practices that, when exercised enough, become these incredible gifts in our lives. And the good news is that our vulnerabilities are what force us to call upon these amazing tools. Because we're human and so beautifully imperfect, we get to practice using our tools on a daily basis. In this way, courage, compassion, and connection become gifts, the gifts of imperfection. She spends the rest of the book exploring these tools and giving her 10 guideposts to the wholehearted journey. Another thing I like is that she defines the words and ideas she's discussing, sometimes writing her own definitions drawn from the research, other times borrowing from others. Here are a few of those definitions. When she talks about courage, she's talking about what she calls ordinary courage. She writes, in the original Latin, courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Today, courage is more synonymous with being heroic. Heroics are important, she writes, and we certainly need heroes. But I think we've lost touch with the idea that speaking honestly and openly about who we are, about what we're feeling, and about our experiences is the definition of courage. Heroics is often about putting one's life on the line. Ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. For compassion, she draws upon a definition from the great American Buddhist nun writer Pema Chodron and her book, The Places That Scare You. They write, the roots of the word compassion are to suffer with. She continues, I don't believe that compassion is our default response. I think our first response to pain, ours or someone else's, is to self-protect. We protect ourselves by looking for someone or something to blame. Or sometimes we shield ourselves by turning to judgment or by immediately going into fix-it mode. Chodron addresses our tendency to self-protect by teaching that we must be honest and forgiving about when and how we shut down. Chodron writes, in cultivating compassion, we draw from the wholeness of our experience, our suffering, our empathy, as well as our cruelty and terror. It has to be this way. Compassion is not a relationship between healer and wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Brown defines the third gift of imperfection, connection, as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. I really like the way she compares the ideas of belonging and fitting in, writing, most of us use the terms fitting in and belonging interchangeably. And like many people, I'm really good at fitting in. We know exactly how to hustle for approval and acceptance. We know what to wear, what to talk about, how to make people happy, what not to mention. We know how to chameleon ourselves through the day. One of the biggest surprises in this research was learning that fitting in and belonging are not the same things. And in fact, fitting in gets in the way of who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. The last two definitions I'll share are for love and belonging. It took her 3 years to write these definitions from a decade of interviews. Love. We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from offering that with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It's something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. Belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. When I finished transcribing these quotes, I sat on the couch trying to process the emotions washing over me. I came up with 3 words. Oof. Ouch. And thanks. Oof. Because even reading it now, 8 years later, it feels like a lot. So much vulnerability and openness is needed to live a wholehearted life. Doing the work, standing firmly in my true, imperfect self, allowing myself to be seen and known, still can feel like a big undertaking. Ouch, because even though I am doing so much better now, I still feel the raw, ripped open feelings I got when I first read these words. And thanks, because these words, this little book, and this journey that I've been on have changed my life. I no longer see hustling for worthiness as my main challenge. Oh, it's still there. But the need to perform, perfect, please, and prove is diminished. And when those little gremlins do raise their heads, I am much better at recognizing them before I act on them. I think my work now is more about love and belonging. What does it look like, feel like, to love myself more so I have greater capacity to love others? And how can I continue to present myself, my authentic, imperfect self, to the world so that my sense of belonging keeps growing? When I read in the prologue that for Brown, this was a process of breakdown, spiritual awakening, I thought, okay, it's good insight about her. Going through it again now, I see that I had my own kind of breakdown, spiritual awakening. A breakdown because it broke down the last bits of self-deception, resistance, and denial that kept me from seeing myself accurately. An awakening because it was a slow, gradual process, literally like waking up. First, my mind awoke to these ideas. Then I felt them in my body, felt the triggers, felt the hot shame I was trying to avoid. And eventually, I woke to see truly how I interacted with people close to me and with the world as a whole. And finally, it is spiritual for me. Using Reverend Marsh's definition of spirituality, that which gets us in touch with something greater than ourselves, this book has been spiritual for me in a few ways. The big one is seeing my struggles exist so broadly, they motivated Brown to write a book about them. Motivated 50 million views of that TED Talk and the sale of over 3 million copies of the book in 35 different languages. I know I'm not alone in making this journey. I hope Sara doesn't feel alone in making this journey. It's a gift to walk this path toward more love and belonging and wholehearted living with so many others. A line in the song, Whistle to the Wind, goes, "There's an ocean between where I am and where I want to be." It's good to sail that ocean, drawing steadily closer to that far shore, accompanied on my journey by so many fellow travelers. May it be so.